Did you know that hippos run really fast? You did. He knows. He had the right answer. Okay, so imagine this. You're being chased by a hippo. That'd be pretty scary, right? Because they're big?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so you see a house up ahead. What are you going to do to get away from the hippo?
Run away.
Run away. Where do you go? There's a house. Where do you go to find safety from the hippo? You go to the house?
Yeah.
What do you do when you get to the house?
Hide.
You hide. Good answer. Or maybe knock on the door, right?
Yeah.
And the person opens the door. And then that person gives you a big hug and says, come on in.
Yeah.
And they slam the door. And then what do you feel? Are you still scared because there's a hippo outside? No, you're not. What do you feel? You feel safe?
Yeah.
Awesome. So here's the thing. That person being right there with you, that's what makes you feel safe, right? Yeah. Well, in our story today, we see that Jesus has a couple of friends named Mary and Martha, and they have a brother that Jesus loved a whole lot. Do you know his name? He has a weird name. It's Lazarus. Lazarus. You got to say it louder. Lazarus. He knows. Oh my gosh, you were so smart, Ethan. That's awesome. So Lazarus gets really sick and he dies. Just so sad. And Mary and Martha, his sisters, they call Jesus and they say, come fix it. Okay? We're so scared. We're so sad. And Jesus comes to be with them. And guess what? Jesus makes it better. Jesus actually is able to bring Lazarus back to life. But here's what we can take away from that. When we show up for our friends when they're in trouble, when they're scared or they're grieving, we make things better, don't we? So just like that person in the house is able to give you a big hug and keep you safe when there's a hippo chasing you, and just like when Jesus showed up for Mary and Martha, when our friends are scared or they're hurting, we know that us just being with them is going to make things better.
Yeah.
Right? Do you show up for your friends? What do you do when a friend is sad? What are some things you can do? You don't know? What if your friend falls down and hurts their knee? What would you say?
Tell the teacher.
You would tell them. That's a great answer. That's a great answer. What if your friend is sad at school? Maybe they just...
I just give them a tissue.
You give them a tissue. That's a great answer. That's a wonderful answer. Those are great things you can do. So when we see someone sad and hurting, we just can show up and we make things better. Let's thank God for being there for us when we're sad or scared, and ask God to help us be there for others. You want to say a prayer with me? Can you just repeat after me? Does that feel good to you, or do you want to just listen to the prayer? Okay, that sounds good. Dear God, thank you for being with us when we're sad and when we're scared. Help us to have the courage and the kindness to be there for each other when we see other people sad or scared too. You always make things better, and we know that through us, you'll make things better for other people too. Amen. Ethan, you're awesome. Give me a 5. Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
Our scripture reading this morning is from the book of John, chapter 11, verses 1 through 7 and 12 through 46. Oh, please stand if you are able, if you'd like to. It's long. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were there, who were with her in the house consoling her, saw Mary get up and quickly go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, there is a stench, because he had been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So this is a significant week for our nation, for us. It's a significant week for me personally, too. My husband and I got engaged on the 4th of July. That was a meaningful day. Thank you. 11 years ago. This is also my dad's birthday is this week. And it's also the 2-year anniversary of my mom's passing. She passed on my dad's birthday. So we'll be leaving tomorrow on the 4th of July to go and gather together as a family. We have a practice, a commitment to each other to gather every year on her heavenly birthday. It's also the 2-year anniversary of the first time I got angry with Jesus. I was out for a run, and my mom had just passed away. She got sick, and she passed pretty suddenly. And I was missing her so deeply and experiencing overwhelming loneliness. And at the same time, I was feeling really hurt from the silence of people that I trusted who had not shown up for me in my grief. And there are times when grief feels like a suffering that is not survivable, and I was feeling this. I needed someone to show up for me. And then I remembered this story from Scripture of Jesus' friend Lazarus dying and being raised back to life. Jesus is summoned to Lazarus' town to be present with him and hopefully to heal him before he passes away. But instead of leaving straight away to be with Lazarus, Jesus stays where he is for a couple of days. And by the time he reaches the home of Lazarus, Lazarus has died. And both of Lazarus' sisters, Martha and Mary, greet Jesus with anger and confusion. If you'd come sooner, Lazarus wouldn't have died. I felt every inch of that because what I wouldn't have given to have been able to save my mom. In their words, in the words of Martha and Mary, I hear the loneliness. They trusted Jesus. They hoped in him. Jesus was constantly putting love into action and healing the hurting and changing the world. And why couldn't he have done that for them? Why wasn't he there for them when they needed him the most? And that's what I was remembering about that story. And it seemed so much like those friends in my life whose distance from me and silence in the depths of my despair were grinding these little broken pieces of my heart into tinier fragments than they already were. Jesus had heard Lazarus was sick and he didn't go to him. And when Jesus finally shows up, Lazarus has already died. And then when Martha and Mary share their grief and their anger, their rawness with them, Jesus responds by saying this illness and death will be redeemed and resurrected to the glory of God. And I hear in Martha's words exactly what I was thinking in that moment as I was remembering this part of the story. I was thinking, well, cool, Jesus, I know my mom is in heaven, but that feels so distant and so sterile to me in the face of such abject sorrow. And that's the thing. When bad things happen in the midst of the deepest grief, oftentimes the wisest words can't break through. Oftentimes words cannot cure our ache. But the story doesn't end there, does it? In the wake of so much grief recently, so many of us are asking what we can, in fact, put our faith in. If we can't believe in our systems, if we can't believe in all of our churches to stand up for us, if we can't trust our neighbors to care about us and to support our unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, what can we trust? And what kind of God can we believe in? Is God showing up? Where is God now, and what is God doing? We need a God who shows up. from natural disasters to personal pain, to interpersonal harm, to systemic injustices that plague our world, all forms of both evil and just trauma and tragedy that happens in life create an extreme form of loneliness, one that feels like isolation, division and strife, alienation, abandonment, forsakenness. Loneliness feels like death. The definition of loneliness is an intense feeling of disconnection. Studies have shown that those with fewer than 3 people they can confide in or turn to for help or count on to show up for them and treat them as though they're sacred are twice as likely to die of any cause than other people. Research demonstrates that children of single parents fare every bit as well as children from 2-parent households when they have more than one invested adult who cares about them. Studies of adverse childhood experiences find that the presence of even one supportive adult can keep even the worst situations from traumatizing the child to where they suffer from lasting mental, physical, and social issues. So this year, our faith may be different. This is a matter of life and death, and while bad theology kills, good theology gives life. It resurrects and transforms. We need a faith that can make a difference in a world where there is no justice for many victims, where hundreds of thousands are dead from a pandemic, where the right of the sick, people of minority identities, and the working poor to thrive and be cared for is up for debate, where our commitments as a nation are not always followed up in the way we interact with each other. You and I need a faith that heals our own grief, our own loneliness, our own brokenness and trauma. If evil is disconnection and the absence of love, it can only be overcome by presence and persistent love. The God we need is a God who is in the struggle, a God who is in love, a God who is in the shadows of the tomb and hanging with the crucified, present with us in the fullness of this powerful, transformative love. This is the God who has guided our ancestors. This is the God who historically we have believed in. And when we have believed in that God and been open to that God's presence, liberation has happened. Independence has happened. And where are we in the midst of suffering? Today, we're going to be using 2 tales of Jesus to answer 3 key questions for us. Where is God in the midst of suffering and evil? What does God's power look like? And what do we do when others are hurting? Let's look back at that story of Jesus with Martha and Mary at Lazarus' tomb, taking a second look at what I couldn't see in that moment. John 11:33 says, when Jesus saw Mary weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Jesus is present with those sisters and feels with them. And as he begins to weep with them in solidarity and this authentic love and emotion for those sisters, things get better. It's then that Jesus orders the tomb opened. His presence releases power, and things change. Things get better. What we see in the story is that when Christ is present with those sisters, present with them in their suffering, in their grief, the power to bring life out of death is released. His tears of compassion and his actions do what all of our theological words in the world cannot. They transform death into life. Presence is powerful. Christ shows up. And I'm not here today to get into why Jesus delayed coming to Mary and Martha. Jesus had good reasons. Today, I want us to focus on how this story reveals 3 vital responses to those key questions. Where is God in the midst of suffering? God is at the tombs and on the crosses with the grieving and the crucified. What does God's power look like? God's power looks like presence, and presence transforms situations of death into life. And what do we do when others are hurting? This is an invitation for us to ask ourselves where we are when others suffer, what we are called to do, and what it is that makes us hesitate to respond sometimes. We see in these answers the same things repeated and re-emphasized in a second story about Jesus, the story of his crucifixion. Right after this story of Jesus with Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, Jesus demonstrates the ultimate act of presence and suffering with us in his crucifixion. This story with Lazarus prefigures his own death. It is God knowing what it's like to feel alone. As Jesus hangs on the cross, Jesus utters a cry that echoes Mary's and Martha's own cries of abandonment. He cries out and says, "Where are you, God?" And this cry, my God, why have you forsaken me?" has baffled theologians. But it's the same cry all of us who have suffered have felt in our souls. This cry is not about God abandoning us. It's about solidarity with us in our suffering. It's a cry of God knowing what it's like to feel alone, to grieve, to long for someone to show up and fix everything. It's God knowing what we are feeling, that we feel abandoned, even if we're not. It's a war cry of love. I believe Jesus' cry on the cross that echoes Mary and Martha's own cry is for us 3 things, 3 last things for us to consider as we leave here today. This cry is a conviction, it is a comfort, and it is a call to each of us. Conviction means being convinced of a truth. Has anyone, show of hands, read the book by Elie Wiesel called Night? Anyone read Night? Okay. So Elie Wiesel was a survivor of concentration camps during World War II. And Night is a book about his experiences. In this book, he saw a child being hanged. And he writes, "Behind me I heard a man asking, 'Where is God now?' And I heard a voice within me answer him, 'Here he is. He is hanging here on this gallows.'" In Jesus' cry, we become convicted of this truth. God is the crucified. God is with the broken and abandoned. What has been our own reactions to the suffering around us? Do we recognize the face of God in the suffering? Do we recognize the face of God in ourselves when we suffer? So this cry is a conviction, begging us to ask, who are the crucified among us today? Who might be feeling forsaken? We stand convicted as we are shown the truth about our world and what is needed. And this cry is also a comfort. Jürgen Moltmann was a German soldier in World War II who became a prisoner of war. And he was filled with such grief and guilt that he wanted to die. Then he met a group of Christians, and he read the Bible. He realized that the cross was, as he says, an act of divine presence and solidarity with all those who feel that God has forsaken them. God actually enters their situation of being abandoned, and the only faith that makes any difference in a world with concentration camps is one in which only a suffering God can save us. This same Jesus, who truly experiences the feeling of abandonment that you and I feel at times, is God in the flesh, God in the fullest, God who is closer in the times of crisis than ever before. This cry is the promise that in our darkest night, in our long loneliness, when we've gone numb from the cold and we can't feel that coming dawn, it's then that God is not just near, but one with us. Maybe we can't sense it, but this God with resurrection in God's blood is so near that God is in us. God's Spirit is bound to our pain, and God is cultivating resurrection. The paradox here is that the place where God is not felt, that moment when I had felt that God was too slow, that God had not responded, that place where God is not supposed to be is the place where God can be found. And finally, this cry is a call. The theologian Andrew Root says, there are certain moments in our life that are utterly God-forsaken and are irredeemable. But often in those moments, someone else will share in our lives with us. I think in those moments, God becomes concretely present. Compassion is more than empathy. It's more than just imagining what another person feels. The word compassion literally means feeling with or suffering with. It means recognizing our very real connection to one another so that we realize that what affects one of us affects all of us. Compassion is the willingness to sit with one another in the mud and the muck of their pain and realizing our connection to it, saying, your mess is mine. And then when we go into that mud, we ask one another, what can we create out of this together? What life and transformation can we cultivate here? That is what we celebrate on the 4th of July, is the coming together of people in the midst of grief and suffering who said, I am not afraid of this mess. What can we create? Compassion is about being present. Even when we cannot control the situation or even know exactly what to do, it's about being present. And it takes courage. Courageous compassion is what pulls us into our sacred relationship with one another, healing our disconnection. But it takes courage. I haven't always had that courage. I remember a time when my friend Ford, his father died tragically in a mountain climbing accident. And I remember just not knowing what to say or do. And so, I was scared of saying the wrong thing. I didn't want to hurt him, and I couldn't fix it. I couldn't make it better. I was scared. And so I did nothing. I said nothing. And I tried to justify it to myself and say, well, I'm giving him his space to process. I don't want to trigger him. I want to respect his privacy. And so once I took a breath in that moment after losing my mom, I recognized those were the same things that my friends were saying to me. And I saw that they're just scared because they don't know what to do. And they don't have the words to say. And they can't fix it. Perfection isn't powerful. Presence is. When Jesus showed up, things got better. We may not be able to literally resurrect the dead, but there are 1,000 different ways of dying, and loneliness and grief feel like death. So I wonder what would happen if we didn't require ourselves to be perfect or to know what to say, and just let ourselves know what to do, which is to show up. Things get better. Friends, let's follow Christ. Let's be present. Let's show up. Let's feel with each other. If suffering is a deep loneliness and evil and trauma are all about disconnection, then the only healing for this is presence. need the right words. You only need compassion. Just be present. Something will shift. There will be power because you are bringing love, and that is the most powerful force on this earth. So where is God? God is where the suffering are. What does God's power look like? It looks like being present with us, bleeding with us, weeping with us, and that may not feel like power, friends, but it is. So faith, after Uvalde, after so many things, it looks like believing in a God whose power is risky, loving, constant presence. It looks like believing that this power is stronger than any other form of power in this world. Faith looks like believing presence with each other can resurrect and transform. Faith looks like being willing to follow Christ to the crypts and the crosses, to be with one another. And it looks like trusting that when we're together, bringing all the courageous compassion we can, something shifts and healing begins. What are we called to do when people around us are suffering? Let me tell you one final story. I have nerve damage in my fingers from frostbite because one of my favorite things to do since I was a teenager is to climb this hill behind my parents' house in Colorado and sit on my favorite rock before dawn and watch the sunrise. And sometimes I would sit for hours in the snowy dark, waiting for those first signs of day, and my fingers suffered for it. But as the sun rose, and as that sun became fully present with me, its rays were so gently powerful that they thawed my stinging little fingertips, and they warmed the core of my being. If we climbed those hills between us, not worrying about knowing what to do or having all the right answers, but just taking the risk of sitting with each other and feeling with each other in whatever icy darkness we're sitting in, we could warm one another as we wait for the dawn. Or better yet, maybe we're the ones who bring the sun. God is in the struggle. God is in love. God is in our presence. May we follow Christ and our ancestors and do likewise.